fly out.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to take us live. Hello, Liberty lovers. My name is Dan Fishman. Welcome to the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. We are on with Dan, Taxation is Theft, Behrman, talking about the rally to free healthcare. Now, I got to start off at full disclosure. Dan and I know each other pretty well. But Dan, I don't know that everybody's familiar with the story of your middle name, because you are Dan, Taxation is Theft, Behrman, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I figured it was more appropriate than my given middle name. I did check with my parents first, and they're not terribly mad about it. But yeah, so I changed it, and everyone asks, well, did you go to the court and file a petition and ask for permission? And I always say, no, free men don't ask for permission. So I changed it by declaration. It is now my lawful name, not my legal name. But you know, the next time I get arrested and I give it to the police, that's when the government will actually start to recognize me as Dan, Taxation is Theft, Behrman. So I've got that to look forward to.
That's an awesome thing. And I like the fact that you said free men don't ask permission. Certainly not when it concerns something about yourself. You know, that's part of the whole libertarian philosophy, is that you own yourself. And so if you own yourself, you certainly ought to be able to determine what you want your name to be. No forms required or anything like that. So I honor that and always will refer to you as Dan, Taxation is Theft, Behrman.
Well, so, I mean, you don't have to use my name my middle name every single time, because then I feel like I'm in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Although Taxation is Theft, Behrman.
Exactly. It would be awesome.
What did you do?
We had a parent calling people, Taxation is Theft, Behrman, can you explain these grades on your report card? Something like that. That would be pretty funny. Let me ask you this. You have, as a title for this rally, I think something that you deliberately picked to be a little bit, to tweak libertarians' interest, the rally to free healthcare. So first, tell me about the rally, and then tell me about the wording.
Sure. So the rally is, so I have a few friends who are diabetics, and this has actually come out into the news a lot pretty much recently. In fact, if you try to research anything about statistics on diabetes, this is all that comes up. And it's the fact that in the United States, you have these insulin pens. It's a pen that's like this long. You tick the little thing, and then it's got a month's worth of injections in it. And diabetics take this to regulate their insulin levels. These pens cost $100 in the United States, but they're manufactured for about $3. And every other country you go to, or a lot of the other countries you go to, you can buy them for only $12. Mexico has them for $12. And the reason for this is not just greed. Yes, there's greed behind this, but it's not because like, oh, we're just going to charge more in the United States. No, because if you had, you know, free market competition, that wouldn't be possible. Somebody would go down to Mexico and say, hey, I'm going to set up a website and I'll sell these 12. I mean, you could buy it for $12 retail, mark it up to 30, and still ship it to the United States and still make a profit. But it's illegal. And a lot of people will say things like, oh, but it's, you know, it's the FDA. They're protecting us. They want to make sure we only get the really good stuff. Well, the stuff that they sell for $12 in Mexico is actually manufactured in the United States by the same brand who sells it in the United States and exported to Mexico.
Wow. So you're actually talking about American goods that clearly, if they're selling them for $12, they're not losing money on them. They are shipping them to Mexico and then selling them still at a profit.
Yep.
And all you're doing is taking the stuff that originally came from the United States, buying it, and transporting it back to the United States. Well,
I can neither confirm nor deny the allegations. All I can say is that we are going to be selling some illegal insulin at the Capitol.
That's awesome.
During this rally. And we are taking certain precautions. But
and let's talk about it quickly. You said you're selling illegal insulin. The insulin itself is not illegal. The insulin.
No, I mean, this isn't heroin that we're talking about. This isn't, you know, this isn't something that people are like, oh, I'm going to go get some insulin so I can get high, man. Like, this isn't a thing that happens. This is a life-saving medication. That's really all it's used for. I don't think there's anybody that really abuses this. But there are millions of Americans, 34 million Americans have diabetes. A lot of them use insulin to regulate, insulin injections to regulate their insulin and their blood sugar levels, and they're basically being cheated out of. They're being extorted to stay alive. I mean, for some people, it's if you're using 1 pen a month, that's $1,200 a year versus 144 if you were to just walk across the border to Mexico and buy it and bring it back.
And I'm willing to bet that if you're doing that for your own personal consumption, is it legal?
Yeah, it's for your own personal. I mean, because that's the thing. You can take your own. You can travel with it here and there, and it's no big problem. But if you were to say, hey, you know what? I want to help 1,000 people out in my city. I'm going to fill up a truck full of it and drive it across. Then yeah, you're going to have some problems.
So let me ask you this. I think most people are aware of how important insulin is for diabetics, but they're probably not aware of how much the price of insulin has increased recently because of the government-supported monopoly. One of the fascinating things about it is that, in fact, the cost to produce insulin has gone steadily downward as more machines get involved and it becomes easy. Exactly. Technology takes effect. There's nothing that you could buy 50 years ago that costs anywhere near as much as it does to produce 50 years ago because of advances in modern machinery, modern chemistry, all that stuff. But so even though insulin has gotten cheaper and cheaper, the people who have been producing insulin in the United States have gotten better and better at lobbying and having the government influence what the prices can be. And I mean, we can call it collusion. It's not a fair open market, right? You couldn't just decide to start producing insulin right now. I mean, your body produces insulin. Let me get that. But you couldn't start.
Don't tell the FDA that. They're going to come and arrest me for producing my own insulin.
That's a terrible thing to think about, is that, once they figure out that everybody's body actually, or everybody who's not a diabetic's body already produces insulin, yeah, they might come and lock us up for illegally competing with the government-sanctioned insulin industry.
Right. And it's interesting because, their whole thing is like, oh, we need to make sure it's safe and effective. And, that's the whole purpose of the FDA. But the truth is there's 47 companies that manufacture this stuff worldwide. And there's only 3 of them that are allowed to sell in the United States. And the reason for that is, you already have these other companies. They know if they come to the United States, they're not going to sell it for $100. They're going to sell it for like 12. And so it's not worth it for them to invest $100 million to get into a market where everyone's already kind of got their monopoly. So it doesn't make sense. But these other 47 companies, they're out there making this stuff, and it's not like this is like it's made in some third world country and it doesn't work. You've got European manufacturers, Asian manufacturers. Like this is legit good stuff. There's no you don't hear about an epidemic of people taking bad insulin and overdosing or underdosing and dying in third world countries because of this. These are, just because it's not regulated by the FDA does not mean it's not good.
Well, and that's a fascinating question, because what is the black market usage for insulin, right? I mean, now I confess, there are designer drugs out there that I am not aware of, although I consider my knowledge on the topic relatively exhaustive on things you can get high on. Maybe there's something that insulin is being used for that's like this nefarious purpose.
I've seen Vicodin is
sure.
It's relatively easy to get. I don't want to say it's easy to get. It's definitely harder to get than insulin. But there's a black market for that, and I know people who abuse that, and it's like. So I think I would know.
I'm going to keep going on that, because that, excuse me, that Vicodin topic is one that I like to talk about sort of at length. There is, what most people don't realize is that 80% of the people who become addicted to opiates start on other people's pain medicine, other people's prescription pain medicine. So they're taking medicine that wasn't prescribed for you. So just imagine a scenario, and I imagine it's the same for everybody around the country, but in Massachusetts and now in Maryland, well, not so much in COVID, but before COVID, you could go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there would be a group of men there who were looking to do day labor. Okay. Hard physical labor, landscaping, whatever. And professional contractors would come by with a pickup truck, have 4 guys get in the back. And in Massachusetts at the time, the going rate was $100 a day. You get $100, you go out and you do 8 to 10 hours of hard labor. People are pretty happy with that. I mean, it was a good exchange. And libertarians, we believe people don't make an exchange unless both sides are profiting from it. So $100 a day, $500 a week, $2,000 a month, roughly. People probably aren't paying taxes on it. Good. But
Good.
when they, that's a living potentially, right? Especially if you got 2 people in the family doing it. So here you are, you're providing for your family, doing hard physical labor. And anybody who's done landscaping, anybody who's done construction, those jobs are not a walk in the park. They wear down your body. You are literally trading your physical health for money, but it's voluntary. So, we think it's okay that people can do that. Just notice that crazy rogue eyebrow. But so imagine you're doing a job like that, and then you tweak your ankle. You don't have any health insurance. You can't go to a doctor. You don't have sick days. If you don't show up, you don't work. And so if you're going to miss one day, maybe you'd say, okay, I'll miss one day. But if you're going to miss a couple days, you think, God, I got to get to work. I got to get that $100. My family is requiring it. And so there's a market at Home Depot, at Lowe's, at 6 o'clock in the morning for somebody who will sell you a Vicodin. And although I knew this intellectually, I didn't understand it until people who follow me on Facebook or have known me for a while have known that I'm a wood heat guy. I'm obsessed with cutting wood and stacking it. And in Massachusetts, I used to get 3 cords delivered at the beginning of the winter. And one day I went out there to stack 3 cords of wood and I tweaked my back like at the very beginning, 5 minutes in. I'm like, oh, I remembered I had Vicodin upstairs from when I had my wisdom teeth out and I didn't take any of them. So I just kept them there. So I went and I took a couple Vicodin and I was able to do 6 hours of hard labor all day, not impaired at all, right? I no mental fogginess, nothing like that. All that happened was I had no pain. And the next day there were no consequences for it because my back had healed and I was fine. But if you were working construction, right, and your family needs that $100 a day, and you work the first day and you take a Vicodin, you're able to work, you get that $100, but your ankle hurts the next day, you're like, well, it's easy. Because I don't know what the price is now, but it used to be that you could get Vicodin for $25, a Vicodin pill for $25 at Home Depot. I have that on loose authority. So, I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? Pay $25 for Vicodin, make $100, $75 profit, as opposed to nothing if you don't work. But you do it 3 or 4 days in a row, you start to get addicted. Maybe there's something wrong with your ankle that you actually need to heal. That money for Vicodin isn't there because, now you're at the point that you can't actually work. But heroin, $5 a bump, right? So that's pretty easy. You can make the pain go away. And even though we sort of know how incredibly addictive heroin is, people sometimes make bad choices and they start getting addicted to opiates because of wanting to work hard. And in reality, these are the people that we want in our country. So it's incredibly easy to get a Vicodin, which I would argue is infinitely more dangerous. And I'm not saying it's the responsibility of the government to protect people from danger, but it's so much easier to get a Vicodin, which is infinitely more dangerous than insulin. And nobody's trying to shut down that market, right? I mean, if anything, right, prescription pain pills, it's because it's distributed by doctors and it makes them money. They've already got these strong lobbyists out there to defend them. But insulin, which can't be abused at all, and I'm hoping somebody can post in the comments if I'm wrong, if you know something about insulin that Dan and I don't know, that, yeah, man, if you take insulin and you snort it after mixing it with baking soda, it'll fuck you up. Something like that. Let me know.
Yeah,
Let me know.
if you spray it on your marijuana before you smoke it,
exactly.
You get high. No, it's funny that you say you were talking about these doctors, because I was thinking about I've got the shirt on today, Taxes Pay Killer Cops, and right. Of course from a different set of rallies, but what I was thinking of today was like, how could I relate taxation as theft to what's going on here? And I think you just pointed it out, and I was thinking about making a shirt that says Taxes Pay Killer Docs or Killer Doctors or something like that. True. because that's what it is, and it's not even necessarily the doctor that you go to. It's the lobbyist doctors. I mean, it's insane what we're seeing right now on COVID, and I don't want to state any opinions on any of this stuff one way or the other. Just that it's really fascinating that the mainstream media has one narrative, and anybody who challenges that narrative is just a lunatic. They're threatened of being stripped of their medical licenses and everything else. And that's not how, and everyone goes around saying, oh, but it's science. And it might be, and maybe the narrative is right. But the problem is that's not how science works. Science has to be challenged. And if you can't challenge it with an open mind, then, it's just propaganda. So
right. Then it's not science. It's actually religion. People say, all the time, what's the difference between science and a religion? And like, you'll hear people who don't really understand science, they say, oh, well, science is just a religion. But the difference is when you challenge science, that makes science better. When you challenge religion, that's blasphemy, and you can get stoned for it. Stoned in the bad way.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the rally itself.
Yeah, so the rally, we're going to have some awesome speakers there. We're going to be talking about a lot of things. The insulin, of course. We're going to talk about a bunch of different ways that that the government is preventing us access to healthcare. And actually, this is probably a good point. To talk about the name, the Rally to Free Healthcare, and there's this whole narrative where everybody's pushing for Medicare for all and these sorts of things. And that's not what I mean by free healthcare. What this is yes, it is intended to be appealing to those who are typically on the left, because I have a platform that I promoted while I was running for president. I'm also promoting it now that I'm running for governor of Texas, and it's a healthcare plan that's going to benefit everybody. So you have the Medicare for all, which typically says we're going to tax one group of people to pay for healthcare for somebody else. And so it's helping one group of people, but it's hurting another group of people. And because of that, you're creating a divide and people are fighting each other.
And you're picking favorites.
Exactly. But what we can do, and what the whole idea of free healthcare is first of all, it's free as in we're going to free it from government control. And by doing that, we actually benefit everybody. So we benefit the right, or the wealthy, or whatever you want to call it, the 1%. Not even the 1%, but
right.
But you benefit them by lowering their taxes and not forcing them to pay for somebody else's healthcare. At the same time, you lower the cost of healthcare. So everybody on the left who either supports Medicare for all, or wants more people to have access to healthcare, or people with lower income who can't afford their healthcare, they can now have access to all the healthcare that they didn't have before, and you don't have to steal from anybody else to get there. And this is really important, because when they come along and they say, okay, we're going to do this Medicare for all thing, what they're doing is they're trying to figure out a way to steal from one person to pay these really high costs. And this is kind of the hidden thing that nobody really sees. If you get Medicare for all, these billion-dollar big pharma corporations are still going to be making their billion-dollar profits. And so all we're really doing is we're saying, hey, yeah, we'll negotiate with terrorists. We'll pay your ransom, right? That's what they're doing. They're holding us. They have, oh, we got this medication. If you want it, you're going to have to give us everything you have, and you're going to have to steal from somebody else. That's what they're telling us. And Medicare for all basically says, oh yeah, we'll pay that ransom. We're the government. So when we steal the money to pay that ransom, it's okay. And it's like at the end of the day, you're still feeding into that greed, and you're paying off those massive profits. Not to say there shouldn't be any profits, but there should be free decisions in making those profits, and those profits shouldn't be as big. And all you have to do is just cut out some of the government regulation. It's that simple.
Yeah, well, and you talk about one of the things that I've been thinking recently about, how people misunderstand the language of liberty, and how liberty is all affirmative rights, right? You have the right to do this, you have the right to do that, something like that. There's nothing that a libertarian believes that can only be expressed as you can't do this, because we believe in permissiveness for your own person all the time. You want to say you can't murder people? Well, yeah, because that goes against one of our affirmative rights. You have the right to live. The language of liberty around healthcare, when people say that you have a right to healthcare, and you hear Democrats say that all the time, that language is broken. And libertarians should fight against that all the time, because the implication that you have a right to health care, well, your health care is provided by a healthcare provider. And if you have a right to health care, you're saying that you have a right to the labor of a healthcare provider. We fought a war in this country saying that you never have a right to another person's labor. And, you know, our income tax idea aside, nobody should be forced to work for you. And if we say that there is a right to health care, we are going against that. And libertarians have to call that out. Now, I will argue on the flip side, I think that a society as wealthy as ours has a duty to take care of people. And I happily step up to that. But that's voluntary. I mean, I think voluntarism gets us where we want to be.
Right. And I want to disagree with you for a second, but
all right.
Let me first say, you know, well, let me say this. So when there's a difference between a right and an entitlement. Yep. And I think that's where we get confusing, because the left says healthcare is a right and they mean it like an entitlement. You're entitled to have this. The reality is healthcare is a right, just like the Second Amendment is a right. That doesn't mean the government's going to go out and give out free guns. But the thing is, if I go to a doctor, I have the right. He's got healthcare and I have a right to buy it. So I have the right to that healthcare. But the government is what gets in between us and says, oh, no. You have to pay all these extra fees and taxes. He has to have this particular license. Otherwise, like, let's say this is a doctor from another country.
Holy crap, you are so right. And I have been wrong.
You don't have a right. You don't have a right to, the government comes around and says, you don't have a right to talk to this guy about your well-being. He's not licensed.
Holy crap.
And this is a fundamental understanding of what a right is. And the way I like to view it is rights are verbs. Do you have a right to do something means, is it right for you to do this or is it wrong? And I think simplifying the language that way makes it kind of changes the perspective. But this is one of the things, you know, when you talk about the language of liberty, you're absolutely right. Libertarians do have kind of their own language, which is what I've been trying to, like, you know, cross that bridge with to other groups. But what's really interesting about this is other groups, everybody has their own language. And that's why it's so important to have discussions. And on my podcast, I've been inviting people who are Marxists and you know, socialists and everybody else to have these conversations, not to fight, but to actually have conversations. And I try not to use big words as much as possible, because as soon as I say, well, socialism XXX YY does this, they're like, well, that's not socialism. And now all we're doing is we're arguing over definitions, and we're not discussing ideas. And I think that's one of the most important things we should be doing, is discussing ideas. Don't say like, oh, we just need to implement socialism. Like, what does that mean? Right,
exactly. It's something about practice. And I want to talk briefly about one of the things you said, that you have Marxists on your show. And why don't you give us a little plug for your show too while we're here?
Sure. Taxation is Theft. So if you go to YouTube or Facebook and look for Taxation is Theft, there's a live stream. Also, anywhere you get your favorite podcasts, if you just search for Taxation is Theft, it's a big black and yellow. It looks kind of like this, but it says Taxation is Theft. Yeah, it's really an awesome show. The theme is, you know, all the ways the government rip you off and what you can do to stop them. So we talk about how to legally evade taxes. Sometimes we have socialists on to have discussions about different ideas about how, you know, what does freedom actually look like. And it's really interesting because I mean, coming from, and I grew up as a Democrat, and then I became a Republican when I moved to Texas, not really, but like a Ron Paul Republican. And then I became a libertarian, and going through this process, like, you know, we all have this mentality of, oh, socialism's bad. But what's interesting is when I talk to a lot of socialists, you know, yeah, they still come up with some central planning sort of idea to fix society. But the fundamental belief is that, yeah, there's something really broken with society that we can all agree on. And so if we start having these discussions, you know, a lot of them actually have some decent ideas about some things. And, you know, if we can at least have these conversations and find that middle ground, we can.
Yeah, it's a critical element, this idea that everybody has good ideas in the political realm. And I agree with you that, I mean, if you talk to people who define themselves as socialists or Marxists, their end game rarely is, oh, I want to enslave everybody for the good of the people. Okay, that's not what they believe. They believe that they want everybody to have a happy and comfortable life, which is what we want as well. They just have a different way of getting there. But the one thing that I found to be universally be true is that if you have a political conversation with somebody who's a Marxist, they know what they're talking about. They know their political belief. If you have a conversation with a Republican or Democrat, they have no idea what their party stands for. They're like, well, it's kind of like my baseball team. I might not be able to tell you who's playing first base right now, but I'm still a Red Sox fan. And that's where Republicans and Democrats are right now. You know, they have no idea what the changing policies are. Like when I told Republicans, like I had this conversation with Republicans and said, you know, your party voted for tax increases under Donald Trump. They're like, no, we didn't. I'm like, oh my God, you guys not only cut the budget, but increased taxes. And they're like, no, it was a tax cut. I'm like, you have no idea. You have no idea how it actually worked. Some people's taxes went up, and astonishing. So let's go back to the Rally of Healthcare. Tell me a little bit about some of the details. Where should we meet up beforehand? What time? What place?
So we're going to be on the south side of the Capitol. There's like a really big park. We're going to set up down there. We don't know exactly where yet, but we will have a PA and we will be playing some music to kick the thing off. So you'll be able to find us pretty easily. But we don't have a permit. We did try to notify them that we will be there. But you know, we're free men. We don't ask for permission, and it's an open space, and we have a First Amendment right. We have a right to speak freely, and the First Amendment of the Constitution backs that up, I should say.
Well, let me ask you. There's a lot of liberty groups in Austin, Texas. Have you contacted any of them? Let them know that you're going to be there.
Yes, and awesome. I think, interestingly enough, the Boogaloo is one of the most excited groups to be out there. So
controversial and misunderstood. I would say that you know, people should definitely do their research on something like that, on that name, because it is tied with other things.
As much as they're just going to be there to support, but I am really going to point out that, you know, these are potentially, you know, I don't know how things are going to go down, but it's very possible that they are the reason that I don't get arrested.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because a libertarian was murdered in Austin protesting for Black Lives Matter. I mean, does that weigh on your mind at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, whenever you get a large number of people in one space, you know, everyone can run around and, you know, wave a flag and say, hey, I'm part of this group. But you can have one person who acts violently, who maybe he's new to the group, he doesn't belong, he's not in agreement with everybody else in the group. And that always, you know, it makes the group itself look bad. And, you know, I think one of the rules that we need to set as we go out and you know, we arrange protests or gatherings or rallies is, you know, we need to have a protocol that says if you see someone starting to act violent, we need to de-escalate that. Like, we as a crowd need to de-escalate that. Right. Yeah, I remember that one.
Yeah, Garrett Foster, for those people who don't remember, was marching for Black Lives Matter. Texas is an open carry state. He did have a gun, a long gun, slung over the front, and a car pulled out into the parade. And Garrett Foster's wife is a quadriplegic. She was being pushed in a wheelchair. He was concerned. Some people had been struck. He approached the car, and the driver of the car shot him and killed him. Now, as far as I know, there's no process in terms of the charges or anything like that. But when we have situations like this, we do want to make sure that we are conscious of wanting things to be as peaceful as possible.
Absolutely. And which is really interesting too, because that's one of the things one of the assumptions about the Boogaloo is, oh, they've got their guns out, they want violent revolution. That's not true at all. I mean, look at every single police officer. They all walk around with guns, and, you know, we're not sitting around saying like, oh, they want violent revolution. You know, they carry it for protection and safety. And especially when we have a protest. I mean, you know, the first time I learned about this was, you know, back in 2008 with the whole Occupy Wall Street thing. Right. And I saw in, you know, In New York, the protesters were getting beaten and sprayed with pepper spray by the police. And in Arizona, the protesters were completely surrounded by, these militiamen in camouflage with their AR-15s and AK-47s, and the police were just sitting there like, yeah, we're not doing anything. We're not getting involved with this. It's for defense. It's for safety. And that just like and not everybody believes this, but if a police officer should carry a gun for protection and safety, individuals should be able to do the same.
I make that argument all the time that we as a society, and we're not going to argue about whether or not it's right or wrong, but in the United States, we have empowered police officers to, in a heated moment, be judge, jury, and executioner. And that is a terrible, terrible power for some person to have. We think that we need it right now, and that's the way that it is. But it's one of the reasons that I say, if we're going to give somebody that power, we absolutely want them to wear body cams so that we know everything that they do along the way, because the potential abuse for that power. You talk about, the importance of being armed at a protest. I made a point a while ago. This was, people remember the Ferguson protests, which happened almost at the same time as the Bundy Ranch protest, same year, a few months apart. But you look at the difference on how the protesters were treated, and there's two serious differences between them. Let's not throw race out of it, right? The Ferguson protesters are mostly black. Right. The Bundy protesters were mostly white. However, the Bundy protesters were also armed to the teeth. And, there is a saying that people make that occasionally, the Second Amendment protects the First. And so, not wanting to instigate, and I think Texas has a pretty good understanding of this, because Texas has an open carry law. You can open carry. And I mean, I think most states have open carry for long guns anyway. It's not uncommon to see people carrying shotguns or rifles around. Hunters do it all the time. However, we've talked about the negative. Let's talk about the positive. Aside from the tremendous good that you're going to be doing by helping people who need insulin to save some money. And I mean, I truly hope
save their lives.
Yeah, save their lives. And I truly hope that, this is going to make a huge difference for some low income people who, they really needed their insulin. They didn't know where it was going to come from this week, that they can come in, and instead of spending, I know you put $100. People were telling me that Walmart has insulin for $30. But this is still an enormous savings for them. That, the difference of that extra $28 or $18 is, that's a day's worth of food for a family of four.
Right. And there are a few things going on now that, they're trying to use the authoritarian way to fix this. I mean, Trump passed an executive order that was supposed to lower the prices on insulin. Apparently that never took effect. And then Biden reversed it.
Really?
There is a new thing that did come out within the last couple of weeks, where a couple of the, one or two out of the three manufacturers are going to offer some sort of COVID discount where they're going to reduce, their price. Yeah. But it's like, you're still making a profit, and yes, but that's temporary. And at the end of the day, people are going to go back to, like, when COVID's done with and everybody's back to work, you still have people with low incomes that are not going to be able to afford it, and they're going to go right back up to their high price. This is something that we need to address in the long term. And insulin is just one of them. This is another, like, outrageous story. I've got friends all over the world. And one of my friends in Uganda reached out to me and said, hey, there's a girl here. She's 8 years old. She needs a heart transplant. We want to raise money for it. And the first thing I'm thinking is, like, holy shit, like, I'm gonna have to raise like a couple $100,000 or something, right? Yeah. So I was like, okay, let's get all the information together, how much you need and all this other stuff. And he said, well, the total cost is $15,000. And I was like, wow, that's not a whole lot of money. So I go and I Google it. How much does a heart transplant cost in the United States? About $1 million. And that includes, like, follow-up care and everything for the first year. $1 million versus $15,000. And I was like, okay, Uganda, I know they don't really have a lot of, great medical equipment there. So what's the deal? How is this going to work? When I was in Entebbe, they didn't have MRI equipment, and all this other stuff. So I'm like worried, like, is this going to be some BS job? No, the $15,000 actually includes medical transportation to get her to India, where they have excellent doctors and excellent equipment. All included in this $15,000. That's amazing. Yep. And you have to. So what's the difference between $15,000 and $1 million? Where does this $1 million go? It doesn't go to the doctors, right? It's not like this isn't a week-long or even 6-month-long operation. This is an operation that takes course over a couple days. Yes, there's some follow-up procedures and everything else, but unless these doctors are getting paid $100,000 an hour, this doesn't make sense. And this is going to insurance companies, is going to licensing and regulations and all this other stuff that inflates all the prices, malpractice insurance. And the reality is, this is making healthcare extremely expensive. So it's not just insulin, it's not just heart transplants, it's everything we do all the time. And you look at, like, anytime you go to a doctor and they give you prescription medication, Vicodin, $25 a pill, like, compare that to aspirin, which is like, a jar of 100 for like $5. It's extremely cheap. And the reason for that is not that they're more difficult to manufacture or anything like that. Some of them do have patents and things, which, we can argue about on that. But some of this stuff, the only reason is it was created after a certain year where they passed these amendments with the FDA, where everything just became more regulated, whereas aspirin and ibuprofen and everything else is predates that. It's extremely inexpensive. And that's compare any medication that you get that's overpriced to aspirin, and the only difference in the price is, like, forget about all this BS that they make us believe about, like, it's this really special high-tech drug. No, it's because of government regulation.
Yeah, and you can ask a lot of people who are in the industry about aspirin, and how incredibly powerful aspirin is as a pain reliever, as a blood thinner, as a daily prophylactic for heart attacks. And most people would agree that if aspirin were discovered today, the government would never let it be available without a prescription, because it's so widely used. And Chris Rock, well, so first of all, I want to call up something that Amber Beltran said. So there are apparently uses of insulin that I was not aware of. So there are some people who juice with insulin to stimulate muscle growth. Carol Unziger pointed out that insulin can be used for a quick weight loss. It's not healthy, but very quick. Those are good things to know. And so apparently there are some illegal uses, unhealthy. I shouldn't do that with a pen stuck on my finger. There are some unsanctioned usages of insulin. However, there's a very famous unsanctioned use of drugs that most people are familiar with. Viagra didn't start off as a ED treatment drug. It started off as a heart condition drug. And I'm probably getting this a little bit wrong, but a heart condition, healthcare, something like that. And it was in clinical trials. And then the doctors noticed that the pills weren't coming back. And that's when they found out we've got a gold mine on our hand.
The side effects were so great, they changed the primary purpose of it. But here's something interesting I want to point out. So yes, there might be some illegitimate uses, just like, you can overdose on Tylenol.
Water is fatal.
Yeah.
Right? More than 2 gallons in a day.
Or just a lot less than that in your lungs. In Mexico, there's no requirement for a prescription to get insulin, and you don't hear about like massive overdoses or anything like that. So
if there's a country that we can point to and say there definitely has been drug problems at the lower level, Mexico's like any other country. It's not like there's it's a country of saints and there's no drug abuse anywhere in Mexico.
Right.
Right. And to take that a step further, that's one of the things I talk about all the time. Too, you can get I can't even think of the name of it now. Low-level antibiotics in Mexico without a prescription too. Sulfa, right? You can buy sulfa over the counter, and we're often told, oh, you can't you can't get antibiotics because if we allow too many antibiotics to go out, it's going to create a superbug, and that's going to be a problem. You know, there's some good science behind that, and there's no question about it. You can show evolution of both viruses and bacteria in the petri dish. On the other hand, people will make good decisions if you give them the information. Which is the greater risk, that overprescription of antibiotics is going to lead to superbug, or that because people have a hard time getting antibiotics, they stop taking their entire prescription because they're hoarding them for the next time they get sick because it's so hard to get antibiotics. We don't know, frankly.
Right.
It's better to let people decide.
And this is what's interesting in the United States. And I know somebody actually mentioned that Walmart's got their insulin for $30, and you know there's all kinds of subsidies and insurance. A lot of people, you know, their insurance pays for it, or their insurance pays for part of it, and they don't know how much it is even. But what I find really interesting is for a lot of prescription medication, you have to go to a doctor, which is going to, like, even if you have insurance and it covers it, it's gonna cost at least your insurance company a couple $100s to get a prescription, to get a medication. And in Mexico, what's really interesting, because it's less regulated, is most of the pharmacies have like a little doctor's office next to it, and you go in there. And I've gone there before. I got some kind of infection in my eye. I went in there. It cost me $2.50 to see a doctor, and they are like, "Oh yeah, we already know what that is. Here, take all this stuff. Get out of my office."
So one of the things that we glossed over is that you are an expat. You are currently living.
I'm on a very long vacation.
Sometimes you spend a little bit of time in Mexico.
Yes.
And so you get the ability to experience healthcare in Mexico.
Yeah.
But
so
you are a U.S. citizen. You have an American passport.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a U.S. national. That's another. Well, I don't want to go off on a tangent on this, but let me just say, if you think you're a U.S. citizen, check your passport and see where it says that. It doesn't.
Interesting.
It says you're a national, which is defined differently throughout the.
It means a baseball fan. Now, congratulations, your team won the World Series, but tough.
There you go. But yeah, I've learned there are so many differences, and you know, one of the can we go off topic a little bit?
We can. We have a quick question here from Matt, who's saying, "What country would you most like in your free healthcare initiative to? How's it already been implemented anywhere?" And I think you were talking about Mexico a little bit.
Well, yeah, but I mean, here's the thing: Mexico, they've got a lot of socialist systems. They do have, you know, government regulation. It's a lot more of an open market. I would say, you know, what I would suggest. You know, I don't know that there are places like this anywhere in the world. But I think what we were talking about earlier, you know, have discussions with people that you disagree with. If every single country, like, there's always something. Oh, is my internet slowing down?
A little bit, but you're okay. You're still here. I'm going to hop in a little bit and say, you know, one of the things that I would recommend people look into is you can Google it and search for medical tourism. And the fact of the matter is that in America, if you're wealthy, because the world is your availability for a healthcare system, then that's the way it works. It works great because you have the ability to travel. And then you can have this a la carte system. Now, it shouldn't be like that, because if it's a free market, there's going to be people competing in the United States who can offer you basic healthcare. Fact of the matter is, healthcare in the United States is controlled by a medical cartel, mostly made up of doctors. Nurse practitioners can do everything a general practitioner does. They could handle 80% of the healthcare needs in the United States. They're not allowed to do that because doctors have used their power, their legal power at the state houses, to prevent nurse practitioners from putting most doctors out of businesses. That sort of protection of a monopoly is what ruins it, and why, you know, if you wanted to get, there's a hospital in Thailand, and I don't know that this is true anymore, but when I was running for Congress in 2012, there's a hospital in Thailand that is entirely staffed by graduates of American medical and nursing schools. So everybody there could be working in the United States, but instead they set up a private hospital in Thailand that you can fly to, and you can get your heart procedure, whatever you need done, usually at like a tenth of the price. And so it's cheaper to go there. American standards, all that stuff. So yeah, to answer your quick question, Matt, is there any place that has a perfect healthcare policy? I don't think there's any country in the world that has a perfect healthcare policy because, as Dan pointed out and corrected me, you actually do have a right to healthcare. You have a right to pick your own healthcare provider and ask them for the help that you want. And I don't know of any country that allows unlicensed medical practitioners.
Right. And what I actually advocate for is certification instead of licensing, because what that means is, you don't have just one government organization that's going to say this person can or can't practice medicine. What you have is, maybe you have different universities or, however it works out, different businesses that offer certifications. We can work out a million different ways. And if somebody says, oh, yes, I'm a doctor. I have, you know all my ratings on Google. You've seen my Yelp reviews. I have a certificate from this university that says, I know everything that they've taught me. And if you trust that university, or maybe it's even the government, but it's not, if it expires or if, something happens, maybe it's your cousin and you trust him. Maybe it's a very small procedure and you say, yeah, I really don't care if you don't have the license. I know you, I trust you. Right. I know you've had a history and your license expired, whatever. You didn't want to pay the extortion fees. That's my right to make that decision for myself. And the government has effectively taken that away. So I would like to see a system where there's certification, because I wouldn't just go, walk into an office of some doctor who says like, oh yeah, I'll cut you open and stick a new heart in there. I'd want to know that he's got some sort of certification or something to back that up too. But when there's only one place to get it, that drives the costs up really high. And what's really fascinating, I think this is kind of what you were talking about, is like, let's say you're my doctor and I'm the patient and I need something from you. If we're sitting in Texas and I say, hey, can you give me some medical advice? Well, now you're a criminal. But if I say, hey, let's take a trip to Mexico, or let's take a trip to some unnationalized island in the middle of nowhere, international waters, and say, hey, give me some medical advice. Well, now you've committed no crime. And It's like the effects of that are exactly the same. And so effectively all you're doing is you're saying not within the imaginary line.
Exactly. It's funny because, as you know, there are plenty of places in America where they have boats that travel outside of international waters and have casinos operate while they're out there. We could do the same thing for healthcare. Now, I'm not sure I want to have surgery on a rocking boat, but for consultations, that's not a bad idea at all. Everybody goes outside international waters. I think we're onto a goal. In fact, I'm going to stop the broadcast and start. I'm just kidding. Start this business up right now before anybody else goes out there and does it. But it's a fascinating thing that you can't dig it. Yeah, exactly. It's like pirate radio, except pirate doctors. Arr! Right on.
Doctors without regulations, or I don't know, what would you call that?
Doctors without regulations is not a bad name.
Technically doctors without borders, right? There's
right. It's literally doctors without borders. Well, and so let me quickly say, so this is, my name's Dan Fishman. I am the executive director of People for Liberty, and this is the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. I had that. There it is. The People for Liberty Lunch Power Hour. My guest is Dan Behrman, who is Dan Taxation is Theft Behrman. You're in trouble because I used your middle name. And he is hosting the Rally to Free Healthcare. What's the date?
It is February 20th at 11 a.m. on the south lawn of the Texas Capitol in Austin.
In Austin, Texas. February 20th. Is there a website yet?
We just put a post. My website is danforfreedom.com.
Yep.
So you can go there. We just put a post up, so I'm going to be sharing that around pretty soon. But that's got all the information on it.
Awesome. And so let's talk about another thing, another sort of political goal. You also are going to be a candidate for public office.
Yes, governor of Texas.
Governor of Texas. The current governor of Texas is Greg Abbott.
Yeah.
And he's a friendly guy, right?
And he's there are a lot of Republicans he's a Republican, and there are a lot of Republicans who don't like him so much.
Yeah, I was being completely sarcastic. I think there's a lot of people who think that Abbott has been very authoritarian, very draconian in the way that he is pushing a lot of orders from the executive office rather than listening to the will of the people, including, of course, changing the way elections were done in the last election cycle. Right, he passed a law that said each county can only have one ballot collection spot, even though most counties in Texas are bigger than the state of Rhode Island, which had several hundred ballot collection spots. So Abbott's a pretty bad guy.
Yeah.
You're running as a Libertarian. Are you going to have to pay? I know there's been a sort of a big brouhaha about filing fees to run for office in Texas. Are you planning on paying a filing fee?
We're going to see how that goes. I'm kind of the kind of person who doesn't file until I have to, because this isn't the way I see this. This isn't about raising money for the government. Right. This is about changing the government. And so we're going to do whatever we have to do, but we're not. It's not like I'm waiting to get my name on the line so I can say, "Ooh, look, I'm official." Because I think I'm kind of doing that to prove a point that shouldn't be, that shouldn't be it. And I learned one of the most amazing things from Arvin Vohra, who's also running for president, where he was talking about the way ballots used to work was you would go to the ballot box and there was no getting on the ballot. You'd get an empty piece of paper and you'd write down a name. And I thought this was truly amazing because you don't have this oh, well, I'm a Republican, so I'm just going to check off all the names that they tell me to check off, which is basically what you're doing, right? Right. I don't know who this guy is running for judge, but the Republican Party has their name next to him. So
there's an R.
Yeah, that's basically what that is. But if you don't know who these people are, you'll never write their names down. And I think that's so important because, we shouldn't be voting for people who we don't understand just because they're with the party. And I say this even to libertarians, and I know I get pushback from this, but just because somebody's a libertarian doesn't mean you're going to like what they're going to do. Doesn't mean they're capable of running that office. It doesn't mean anything. You need to know who these people are that you're voting for.
More than that, there are people who can claim to be libertarian who aren't libertarian at all. And a great example of that would be, in New York, where, there was an attorney general who got elected as a libertarian and he sort of pretended to be a libertarian. But since then, he's been cracking down on drug laws, marijuana arrests in his county, stuff like that, things that no libertarian would ever do. It's an interesting sort of dilemma around that. We had actually proposed in Massachusetts, we had a bill before the House to first remove political designations from the ballot sheet. And then that one actually got struck down. And then I suggest the next one was to put a bunch of fake names on there as well, so that you would actually have to pick out and have multiple Republicans and Democrats, so they would have to know who to vote for, who's the real candidate.
Phone a friend.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. No, but what's interesting? Also, the Declaration of Independence says, governments are instituted among men to, resolve disputes and protect rights and all these other things. And that when the government does not serve those ends, it should be altered or abolished. But when the Constitution was written, they never really put anything in there to alter or abolish it. Well, kind of to alter, but not to abolish it. And so what I think would really be an amazing change would be to put on every single ballot a ballot initiative that says, for states, it should say, should we secede from the Union? Or should we completely dissolve as a state? Not because I want that to happen, because there's benefits to that. There's benefits to not doing that. But what I think is truly interesting is if you put that on there, you're going to have so many politicians who are like, "Oh, we should care that we have a 5% approval rating."
Right.
Because ultimately you can say okay, yeah, I'll vote for this guy, but really I don't like these guys at all. Let's just get rid of them. And if that drops below 50%, the state has to go away. Hey, if that's what 51% of the people demand, we have a democracy, right? Isn't that what should happen? So,
and you know, there is this misconception that Texas has the right to secede from the Union because it entered in 1845 as a independent country. Texas had been an independent country from 1836 to 1845. I grew up in Texas. That's how I happen to know these dates. Texas gets all sorts of rights because of that. The Texas flag can be flown at the same height as the United States flag. The Texas Capitol is actually taller than the U.S. Capitol, which is prohibited to all the other states. However, a lot of people say, "Oh, Texas." Exactly.
That's so petty.
It is. It's unbelievably petty. But Texas does not have the right to secede. They actually did have that when they originally entered, and then they lost it after the Civil War when they were readmitted to the Union in 1870. So there's no right to secede anymore in Texas, but there's the right of people. And as you pointed out, government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed is in the Declaration of Independence. And, you know, if we don't consent to be governed anymore, and if there's a state that could go it alone, it's clearly Texas. And go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to point a couple things out. So first of all, this is a contract between Texas and the United States. This was a contract that they signed voluntarily,
right,
more or less.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is, well, first of all, I didn't sign anything, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not a party to any of this, and I can say I want to secede from all of it, right? Any person has that right.
Right.
But what's interesting is that, well, here, let me give you there's this case law, Yickwo versus Hopkins. It was this, it's kind of unrelated, but it was very interesting that they put this in the case. It was in the late 1800s, and there was a Chinese laundromat, and basically there was this regulation about how they had to be constructed, and all the laundromats were not up to code, but it was only the Chinese who were being arrested for it. And so it was a civil rights case, basically, or an equality case that was brought up. But one of the things that they wrote in the comments is sovereignty, of course, remains with the people. It is not subject to the law,
right?
Because we, the people, created the government, and the government, we gave it the authority to do certain things. And I think that's truly important, because we think of sovereignty as like, that is like the top. That is the top of the chain of command. And it is very rarely that you hear that the people are the sovereigns. We don't take orders from the government, we give them orders. And that's the way things are supposed to work.
That is the way things are supposed to work. I look forward to the day that government comes around to recognizing the fact that consent of the governed is not a passive consent. It has to be an active consent.
Right.
Libertarians are fundamentally about consent culture.
And I want to say this about contracts too. This is very dangerous to have a contract that cannot be terminated. And you know, whether it's a state that's not allowed to succeed, or whether it's you bought a house and you have an internal contract with your HOA.
Yeah.
Any contract should be terminated, because it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, oh, well, you bought the house, you have a contract to pay the property tax. Okay, but what happens when the economy totally tanks and you don't have a job and all this other stuff? Oh, well, you can't pay. You're not causing any harm to the government if you don't pay the tax, because, you know, if you're out of work, they're out of work. But we still have this mentality of, yes, but the contract must be served, and there's no way to ever end it. And I think that's fundamentally something we as a people need to understand, that any contract that's designed to be in perpetuity is completely surrendering your rights.
Right. I will argue. So obviously all government taxes bad, as it says in your middle name. Maybe I can change my name to Dan. Taxation is bad, Fishman. The TIB acronym isn't quite as good, but when people sign up with a homeowners association, that at least is voluntary in that it's in the contract when they buy the land. If you don't like the process of your homeowners association, you don't have to buy that piece of property. And that's different from property taxes, which you don't get.
All of it. Yeah, exactly.
You don't really
and I agree. My thing is that we shouldn't sign that contract if there is, because I mean, it's the same thing. It's not a big government. It's a very small government over a small community. But if you sign that contract and it's eternal, or at least until you sell the property, What could that HOA turn into? I mean,
Right.
it could be taken over by Nazis, and they have all these like ridiculous rules that they're imposing. You have to paint your house pink and everything because you didn't show up to the meeting to vote.
Right.
And it's like at some point you need to be able to say, no, you know what? This isn't working out, and I want to terminate this contract. Imagine if you got your cell phone and you signed an eternal contract with it. Like, it doesn't make any sense. We should not be doing that as a people. And I think that's really my point to that. Not to say we shouldn't have HOAs, but that we shouldn't sign contracts in perpetuity.
Well, unfortunately, Verizon is listening in on this, and they now have a.
I got this great idea.
Exactly. All right. Well, my name is Dan Fishman. I am the executive director of the People for Liberty. My guest for the Liberty Lunch Power Hour has been Dan, Taxation is Theft Behrman, who is hosting the Rally to Free Healthcare next Saturday, not this Saturday, next Saturday on the South Lawn at the Texas State Capitol in Austin. If you want to find out more information about it, go to plug the website.
danforfreedom.com.
danforfreedom.com. And obviously, I think that's a tremendous name for a website. Dan Behrman, it has been a pleasure to have you on the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. Thanks so much for being here.
Been a pleasure.